Tell us a bit about your organisation, what it is and how it started.
So Transgender and I'm one of the directors of the organisation. We started in 2018, and it was kind of a cross kind of across the community. A few folks just came together to found a fit for purpose human rights organisation. And what we're primarily concerned with is, obviously supporting and advocating for trans communities across Northern Ireland, and we do that at a bunch of different levels. So we do the kind of international human rights advocacy. We engage with the UN and kind of do policy work on that kind of level. We also directly support the communities. So we run a trans community space. It's the only dedicated community space for trans folks in the whole of the UK and Ireland, and it's in Belfast. It's a pretty big deal. And then we also, kind of support and advocate for trans communities as well. So, if people are struggling to access healthcare, or they're experiencing issues in education, or there's difficulty with benefits or housing or whatever, we can provide support there as well.
What services, events, and activities does your organisation offer?
A lot. There's a lot of stuff. We do try to. So one of our kind of main focuses is trans awareness and inclusion training for private organizations. So kind of youth groups and hospitals and healthcare teams and whoever the hell wants to be more aware and inclusive of trans people. We can go out and deliver training and kind of support them on a policy level to do that. But we also do kind of run things like video game events for trans people. We run just general drop-ins for folks in our community centre. At least we did during peace times, whatever you want to call it. Right now we're mostly offering our stuff, our events and kind of support online. I'm one of the directors, so I'm on the board of Transgender NI. But I also do a lot of the kind of front-facing work in terms of media and training, and also just delivering support directly to folks as well. But my main focus, or at least I try to make my main focus policy. So kind of pushing and kind of campaigning for positive policy changes for trans communities, making the Northern Ireland a better place for trans folks at a legislative and policy level. I got involved actually at quite a grassroots level. I'm from Newry myself, so it's not rural, but it's getting there. And so I got involved when I saw actually there's no trans groups in Newry, and very little LGBT groups, and I just kind of wanted to start up my own. So I got in touch with my colleague, my now colleague Ellen, who was running kind of the trans youth service at the time, and basically was like, here, I would like to run one of these down in Newry. And so we did. That's kind of how I got involved. It was almost per chance. It was reaching out and basically saying, yeah, there's a gap here, and I would like to fill that. So yeah, we did.
What are the main issues facing the LGBT community in Northern Ireland, and particularly the transgender community?
I mean, there's a lot. there's a significant amount, and there has been for a long time. I mean, we've made pretty big gains in terms of, homosexuality was decriminalized like 50 years ago. We have got equal marriage now in Northern Ireland. So there have been pretty strong steps forward in terms of LGBT rights in the region. There's still a long way to go, though, especially for trans communities. Currently in Northern Ireland, the only adult gender identity clinic in the region, which is based in Belfast, has not accepted a new patient since around January 2018. So trans people's access to healthcare, basic healthcare, basic transition-related healthcare, has been essentially cut off. There have been almost no people seen, and the people who are getting seen are going privately or are self-medicating in order to access care. So healthcare is probably the biggest one for trans folks. There's also, legal gender recognition, which is a big topic of debate in the UK media right now. But, in Northern Ireland, we have a pretty similar, or exactly the same law, but, almost no kind of movement to change that currently. So, those are two of the big kind of policy things that would need changed. But there's so many areas, so many other areas that affect trans people and LGBT people disproportionately. So things like access to welfare, universal credit hit the LGBT community like a sack of bricks. The kind of the cutting of welfare and kind of the housing benefit being removed and replaced with universal credit also had a major impact. Access to education and employment, non-discrimination, and protection from kind of abuse and harassment in those areas.
So how do you think sort of the attitude towards the LGBTQ community in Northern Ireland has changed over the recent years?
I think, as LGBT people have become more visible, as LGBT rights have become more, have been pushed in many cases, have been debated in the media a lot, unfortunately. We have seen public opinion moving in favour of LGBT rights. We saw the first kind of major inclusion of trans issues in the Northern Ireland Life and Times survey last year, which 2019. And that showed that I think it was around 70 to 80% of people would not consider themselves to be prejudiced against trans people. Now, obviously, if you're asking someone if they're prejudiced against other people, that's not really a good indicator. But they also asked other questions like, how comfortable would you feel if a trans person was using the toilets that aligned with their gender, and domestic and sexual violence refuges and stuff like that. And in all cases, the majority of people in Northern Ireland were in favour of trans people accessing those services as who they say they are and who they are. So, as much as there is this big debate in the media, as much as there is this almost kind of moral panic around trans issues, what we've seen in the general public is that people support trans folks, they support trans rights, and they acknowledge that trans communities are and have historically been a kind of disadvantaged and underserved group, and that needs to change. So, we've made a lot of steps forward. Obviously, there's a lot of education that needs to be done, but we've made a good start.
Like, what would you want to see happen in the future?
A few of those issues that I mentioned, things like housing, welfare, education, making sure that trans people are able to access those easily and safely. Things like kind of special considerations for trans folks when accessing housing, and making sure that it's in a safe area and that they're kind of, that they're secure and being supported and stuff like that. The biggest thing that we would like to see change is the situation on healthcare. So, being able to access any kind of care without having to pay for it, or without having to, dangerously and unsupervised, take some yourself, which is unfortunately the choice that a lot of people have been left with. So what we're hoping to urgently see is some support for trans communities while a review of these services is ongoing, while we kind of reform healthcare services. We'd also like to see, obviously, every person in Northern Ireland being able to have a home and not having rent insecurity, and being supported, not being in poverty or being unable to afford food, as trans communities in particular are underemployed in a lot of areas, because of issues in education, lack of qualifications, and then issues kind of going on to employment. So there's a lot of poverty and a lot of homelessness within trans communities, and the way that we value things like housing, the way that we deliver benefits, the way that we kind of treat people in the workplace, all of these things need to change. But obviously, there's a big long priorities list.
How do you think lockdowns and restrictions have affected the LGBT community and their mental health?
Lockdown has cut out a lot of support that people have been accessing. A lot of LGBT folks in general, you know, if they aren't supported by their family, and kind of have had to develop almost families outside of their biological family, have had to develop kind of support groups and friend groups outside of that. If they're stuck in an uncomfortable living situation, if they're stuck with family who won't support them, or whatever the case may be, that can add to the stress tenfold. That can create these really hostile environments where people's mental health just rapidly deteriorates. So I think that's one of the major ones, is just people's experiences of uncomfortable living situations is absolutely massive. And when you think about, the impact that lockdown has had, especially whenever you're thinking about younger LGBT people, they're either at home or in school. I also, think that COVID has had a massive impact on the situation with healthcare and the reform of our services, and has had a kind of delaying effect on that. So what we're seeing is a lot of trans people who are just like, well, I don't know when I'm accessing care. I don't know when I'm able to get the support that I need. We've obviously been trying to, bring our support services online, making sure that people aren't left without a sense of community while they're in isolation, or while they're in lockdown, especially those in rural areas. But there's only so much we can do when the statutory services, the healthcare services and stuff just aren't up to scratch.
Do you have any plans like for the organisation after COVID, like things expanding or anything?
We would love to expand. We would love to offer more services and, get more staff in and stuff like that. Accessing funding is hard. We've been lucky in that we've been able to keep afloat over COVID, thanks to some, kind of support grants from Belfast City Council and from the Department for Communities and stuff like that, and obviously continuing to deliver our training. But the trans community in Northern Ireland is very underfunded. We've essentially had to fundraise and crowdfund for the support that we currently have, for the premises that we currently have, for, kind of the ability to continue delivering the support that we currently do. Of course, we have got plans to expand the team. Hopefully we'll be getting a specific kind of healthcare support officer, or a healthcare advocacy person within the organization very soon. And yes, we do have plans to get more youth groups, especially out around Northern Ireland. Before COVID, we had one in Derry, one in Newry, and one in Belfast. Obviously that isn't enough, and we want to expand down to places like Enniskillen and more mid-Ulster, more rural areas, where there are trans folks who need support. So yeah, absolutely, we do have plans to expand, but the uncertainty that we've been left in with COVID is obviously having an impact on our ability to kind of plan for the future. And we've seen a lot more people needing support, needing advice, needing kind of a listening ear even.
Living in a rural area, like myself, I've sort of felt isolated and sort of left behind at times. When looking for help, I've had feelings before of like my only escape would be to move to the city, or like a move country completely almost. What advice would you sort of give somebody in that situation?
I was the same. Again, I'm from Newry myself, and there was very little kind of access to support for LGBT communities down there. And I personally had applied to go to university in England. I didn't want to stay in Northern Ireland, for the exact reasons that you mentioned, is that, there's this lack of support. There's almost this culture of kind of anti-LGBT ideology that has permeated our kind of little region here. And that's really, really unfortunate. But what I would say to LGBT people kind of currently living here and possibly staying here is that, we are the change. We are the people that are going to, change our communities, make that impact, educate our families, our kind of local areas and stuff like that. We're the people who are starting up youth groups in rural areas. We're the people who are pushing Northern Ireland forward. You hear a lot about this brain drain that kind of has an impact on Northern Ireland, and I think it's a culture drain as well, because there's so much like diversity and diversity of experiences and kind of identities that leads to, or that could create such a better region and a more inclusive region. That isn't currently happening because people are moving. We've tried to move stuff online and stuff like that, but and to reach more rural areas, but there's obviously a lot more that needs to be done.
How do you think having more resource centres and access in rural areas would help people?
I think that actually one of the benefits of the kind of COVID situation is that we've been able to move a lot of stuff online. We've been using platforms like Zoom and like Discord and stuff like that to reach communities that we haven't been able to reach before, whenever we were, kind of obviously trying our best to reach beyond the urban centres, but there's only so much you can do when a lot of our events are physical. They're in person, kind of requiring you to access a center, or being able to go to this kind of urban center in order to access support. Obviously, what we've tried to do is pay for people's bus tickets and make it, remove some of the barriers to accessing that support. But I think that, our plans, I'm planning on continuing a lot of these online support sessions. We're planning on, kind of not stopping them whenever COVID stops, because we find that a lot of people just find it much easier to engage online. They find it much easier to access services in that way. Things like kind of the IAM Project's counselling services have also been going online. And so, they've been able to reach more people that they might not have been able to before. Excuse me. And also just kind of provide support to a wider population, a wider group of people. So, I think that putting a lot of services online is definitely helping with that, but it's not the full solution. It's not the only solution. What we do need is for the executive to fund LGBT groups to acknowledge the intersection between LGBT identity and rurality, and the way in which that creates issues for people, the way in which people are unable to access care in rural areas, the way in which that forces people out of those areas, that forces people out of the country. Hopefully there's an LGBT strategy that's being developed by Stormont now. We've heard a lot about these gender strategies and race strategies and LGBT strategies, and a lot of the time they are talking shops, but hopefully, if we're in the room for that, so hopefully we'll be able to influence it in a way that recognizes the needs of rural LGBT people, and that recognizes the funding gaps there as well, and make sure that things like there are things like resource centres, the likes of the LGBT Centre in Belfast and Derry, and the Trans Resource Centre in Belfast as well, that those things get expanded and moved into more rural areas as well. That is absolutely something that is essential in order to provide proper support.
Do you have any advice for anyone that says would want to start their own group?
I did it myself. I think it's a really good way to get involved in the community. If you notice a gap in services, a gap in support, saying yes, absolutely, we need to fill that gap. That's a really, really good it's a really good instinct to have. What I would say is that this stuff is hard. This stuff is hard. Supporting people is difficult, especially when those people are in many cases quite vulnerable. Transphobia in wider society creates a lot of mental stress, and therefore there's a lot of mental health issues within the community. There's a lot of substance abuse issues within the community, and so supporting a vulnerable community comes with nuances, comes with there needs to be proper safeguarding in place. There needs to be proper structures in place to make sure that everyone is safe, that the people running the events are supported, and the people who are attending the events also feel safe as well. So my biggest piece of advice to you, if you're trying to get something started up, is get in touch. get in touch with Transgender NI, with Cara Friend if you're doing an LGBT youth group, or Gender Jam if you're doing a trans youth group. We have developed that expertise. We have developed those policies, the safeguarding procedures and stuff like that, so we can help you get that stuff set up. And we've been doing that in places around the country as well. So absolutely, if you're wanting to get some of that startup, that's how I got involved in this, and I think it's a really, really good idea. But yeah, just get in touch, reach out. We're very happy to help.
Is there any other sort of advice or information you'd like to give just for people maybe in the community who maybe feel isolated, or
Just in terms of our own services, if there is any trans person out there looking for support or advice, or to find a community, is feeling maybe isolated or whatever, we do run an online community space. If you get in touch at support@transgenderni.org.uk and give us a wee email, we will absolutely be able to, chat with you, kind of see what support is needed, and also just link in with community. Sometimes what folks need isn't necessarily, direct support or someone to work through their gender with, or whatever the case may be. Sometimes people just need a bit of a community, to a community of people with similar experiences, with similar kind of similar backgrounds, and a place to share those experiences where you won't be judged. And hopefully that is what we can provide. And so if there's anyone out there who needs any kind of support, please do send an email. If there's anyone out there who needs policy support, or is looking at this and is like, we have trans people in our organization and I don't have a clue how to support them. One, we're people, so it's relatively straightforward, just ask. But two, we can also provide training and policy support and advice to organizations who are wanting to become more inclusive. So yeah, please do get in touch. If you're a trans person, it's support@transgenderni.org.uk. If you're anyone else, if you're an organization who wants to become more inclusive or anything like that, send a wee email over to info@transgenderni.org.uk and we'll be able to get back to you. And yeah.
Thank you very much for coming on and speaking with us. You've given us tons of information, and we really, really hope it goes out and helps somebody.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.